Well, let's go through the newspapers for you now with the political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Mr. Nigel Nelson, and the broadcaster, Miss Liz Kershaw. Good morning to you both. It's good to see you. And Liz, I know you, in the Times, you spotted that power cut story that we just mentioned there.
Yes, I mean, I'm old enough, hands up, to remember, and I think Nigel is as well at this table, sitting doing your homework or
that's right,
having your tea by candlelight in the 70s.
Me too.
You are?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were only 37.
Oh, yeah, Liz.
Anyway, that was because there were miners' strikes and picketing power plants and everything else. This one, of course, if it comes off, is because of the war in Ukraine and sanctions on Russian gas and oil supplies. Now, we're repeatedly told since the war broke out that the UK only gets 4% of its energy from Russia, and we're, pretty secure energy-wise because we get most of ours from Norway. Well, that's a problem when winter comes, because everybody's now scrambling around. We're competing with all the other countries in Europe who are trying to cut off Russian supplies, and they're all begging Norway for energy as well. And these huge containers ships coming in from the likes of the USA with frozen liquid gas in them. So it's going to be a mad scramble, and we're being warned that there might be power cuts, so no electricity in the peak hours when everybody's getting up and having a shower and putting the kettle on and going to work. So early morning and tea time. Now, the thing is with this, it's not the government's fault that there's a war in Europe, and and the sanctions, I agree with. I think most people do. However, have we got ourselves into this mess? Because we've adopted this policy of shutting down our coal-powered energy plants when China's opening a new one every week, and we've closed our mines for the coal, so we import it from places like Brazil, and also we've closed down gas storage centres because they were thought to be uneconomic and not needed, so we can't even get the gas in the summer and store it up for the winter. We've also decommissioned our nuclear power plants, and there's now moves afoot from the business sector, etc., to try and persuade these nuclear power plants, who should be running down, like Sizewell in Somerset, to keep going longer. It's a complete mess. There's been no forethought towards this country's energy security, and we're all going to find ourselves in a right mess this winter.
That's certainly the worst case scenario, isn't it? At the beginning of next year, for about a month at those real peak times, so morning and evenings, there might have to be rationing. Nigel, what kind of policies, we've talked about there, extending opening hours and, delaying the closure of some of those plants. What other strategies are the government actually looking at to try and mitigate against this?
Well, I mean, it will mean coal power stations have to keep going. And obviously, we have a real problem here, because on one hand, we're trying to get to net zero, let's close down fossil fuels, and then Ukraine comes up and changes the whole perspective. So, yes, it could well mean that, as Liz says, we're talking about keeping coal-fired power stations going longer than we intended. We have got new nuclear power stations coming online, but probably not for a while. I think we're going to have to bear the burden of Ukraine for quite some time. And also, the other problem, and probably a greater problem, is food shortages, especially in places like Africa, because the Ukraine grain harvest is not getting out.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because you mentioned, candles. Oh, we have to get the candles out.
Yeah.
And part of me initially thought, well, we've managed it before, we'll manage it again. The difference is now, though, our economy is so much driven by what happens online. Actually, we need electricity.
That's going to be the real problem, because obviously, if you have no electricity, all our computers are going to disappear. Can you imagine what would have happened if we'd had the pandemic before we had online and computers? The pandemic would have absolutely destroyed this country.
You're all right, Stephen. Being my neighbour, I'm building up. I've been preparing now for off-grid for a few months.
Have you?
So I've got my well in the garden, as you know.
Yes.
I've log piled. I've planted potatoes.
Oh.
I've got a wind-up radio. I've got candles. So, you know,
So everyone's on this round, I think.
No, because only because I'm not being clever clogsy about it, but I kind of, you know, looking at the news and looking at the way things were going, I kind of thought to myself, we might actually have to look out for ourselves here and not rely on the you know, the grid for power and everything, because even water, you know, it only takes a hacker to hack into the. I'm really doom and gloom.
You are doom and gloom.
I'm trying to be practical and helpful.
Well, I'll tell you what, Liz is preparing her logs to burn, Nigel. According to the Eye, the Prime Minister's just going to keep warm by a bonfire of EU rules.
This is
Oh,
always,
I like what you did there.
this is always promised. I thought that Liz and I had given up talking Brexit years ago, but here you go. These are all the various EU laws that we plan to get rid of. All sounds terribly good, except for the way that they're going to do it. So what happened was that when we left the EU, we put all EU law into domestic law, and the idea was we'd get rid of them one by one after that. Now Boris Johnson wants to go quicker with this, and so he's going to use what's called statutory instruments, which means that ministers say, well, get rid of that law, get rid of this law, and it's not debated in Parliament. So the idea that MPs would get rid of laws gradually and decide which ones we needed to keep, which ones to get rid of, that goes out the window. And that's the worrying bit. The whole thing is that, yes, get rid of them, but look at them one by one to make sure you're not losing something that's really important,
So
like to do with workers' rights, for instance.
You think the principle is good, but the process is wrong?
Yeah, basically. The once Brexit had happened, totally understand that the whole point of Brexit is sovereignty. We want to get rid of EU laws that don't work for this country. But let's study the ones that do work. And if you just start chucking them away, you could be throwing out babies with bathwater, effectively. So much better that you take the process a bit slower and let MPs scrutinise it.
Liz?
Well, it should always be democratic, and it should be a government, as opposed to Parliament. The government should not be so powerful. It should be accountable. So yeah, I agree with that. You can't just sit in the number 10 cabinet office and go, oh, we're going to scrap that law, I'm going to scrap that law, if they've all been agreed by 650 MPs in the House of Lords in the first place.
Oh, well, let us know what you think about that one. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Sticking with the Brexit theme, Elizabeth, graduate schemes, we're going to try and get more top graduates into the UK post-Brexit.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article in one of the papers over the weekend about the number of foreign students that in a higher and higher proportion in our universities, and universities are like businesses now, aren't they? And so it's much more lucrative to have foreign students. So that's been an ongoing trend for the last 10, 15 years, especially in the Russell Group universities, which includes Oxford, Cambridge, Warwick, Leeds, Bristol, those kinds of places. And which I went to. But this is to make. What's the matter?
No, you always have to drop that in.
Well, you know, a bit competitive, aren't we? Anyway, the new plan is that at a stroke now because of Brexit, I didn't know that this couldn't happen before. We can now attract the brightest graduates from places like Yale, Harvard, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They can come and work here now on a visa, special visa, 2 or 3 years, and this is to fire up the British economy, to import talent. I mean, it has been really hard I've got an American friend who's legitimately married to a UK citizen, and the hoops that he had to go through to remain in this country, even when married. So, yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah.
You know, so Todd's with Nigel probably thinks of Brexiteers. Oh, immigration.
Actually, I'm in favour of this too.
Good.
It makes sense. Let's get the brightest and the best that we can bring into the country, provided there are specific jobs for them to come to. and they pay the NHS levy, which they're going to. Yeah, this is fine.
Well, they have to pay that, but they don't have to have a job arranged before they come with this scheme. That's the difference.
Right.
Let's talk about the NHS, because there's a story, Nigel, in the Express. This idea, some people calling that if you miss your GP appointment, you should be fined.
Well, I've got some sympathy with this. I mean, it costs £175 million a year by people simply not turning up. And so what you do need is some kind of system to ensure that people do. Now, it may be you try and do a fine, which is what the suggestion in the Express is. What goes against that is who collects it? Do you ask the receptionist to fine you? It would actually be a difficult process.
Or do you pay like a deposit for your appointment or something?
Now, Rosie, you're onto something here.
Okay.
But, what I'd like to see is for people who actually pay for their prescriptions to pay a prescription charge to go and see your GP. So when you book in, you automatically pay that. It's not, it's not a huge amount of money, but a GP's appointment costs about £30. So it would give some money towards that. A lot of people would object to that on the basis the NHS is meant to be free at the point of use. In fact, it's only ever been free at the point of use for 3 years from its inception. So we do pay for things on the NHS. We pay for prescriptions, those people who do, dental treatment, eye tests and so on. So the idea of actually making a contribution to a GP visit seems like a good idea to me, and that would stop people thinking, I'll just book and then I won't turn up.
Except for the fact that it's something like 90% of people, or 80%, it's a very, very high figure, don't pay for the prescriptions.
Well, that's fine. That's what I'm talking about. They would then be, anybody who doesn't pay for prescriptions would be exempt from this.
So it's not going to work, is it?
Well, it works in the sense that it focuses your mind about the idea that you don't go around cancelling GP appointments. So it's partly a money-raising way for the NHS, but mostly to actually get this idea into people's heads that the NHS isn't free. If you don't turn up, if you don't do the things you're meant to, it costs the NHS money and other people will suffer.
I think there'll be people at home furious because it's taken them 3 weeks to get their doctor's appointment. There are some people who can't be bothered to show up or don't cancel before they know they can't get it.
I tried to get a doctor's appointment face-to-face with somebody, and in the end I had to go and present myself at the reception desk after they'd been trying for 5 months. Since Christmas,
5 months?
to get a face-to-face, And the girl on the desk, I thought, this is really sad. I felt sorry for her. I said, I don't blame you. I just asked her a few questions. She said, we've got 3 doctors in this practice. On any one day, there's only 1 of them in. And I've only got 3 face-to-face appointments per week for all the patients on this practice. Anyway, I think you should have to pay something. I think that our rose-coloured spectacles have to come off. Let's start telling the truth about the NHS. You should have to pay for something. Somebody once said to me, if you go to a wedding, you've had one recently, and there's a free bar, people will just keep going up. At the end of the night, there'll be loads of half-drunk drinks on the table with fag ends in them. If they have to buy their drinks, they make sure they consume them.
Yeah.
So I'd like to see a charge. I mean, it used to be €10 in Ireland, I think.
Right.
The very poorest wouldn't pay. If you know, I went to the doctor's first time in ages. Couldn't get to see a doctor, but I got a prescription, and I found out I didn't have to pay because I'm of a certain vintage now. I was so thrilled, but I thought this is ridiculous.
It's interesting. I'd love to get your views on that. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We're out of time, but we will catch you two a little bit later on. Thank you.